Welcome to today's panel presentation at The Wire, an interview. I'm Terry Kendrick, and I'm a volunteer for the Festival of the Book. And before we get started, I have just a couple housekeeping items. One being, please turn off your cell phones. Or, iPod, anything like, please turn those off. And today I'll be introducing the moderator. Today's moderator is Roger Hedden. Roger Hedden's plays have been performed at theaters including Lincoln Center Theater, the Ensemble Studio Theater. I hope that was important. Naked Angels, Atlantic Theater Company, Florida Stage, and East 59. He wrote the screenplay based on his play for the film Bodies Rest in Motion. He co-wrote and produced the film Sleep With Me and wrote and directed the film High Life. He is the playwright in residence at the Montana Repertory. Thank you. Roger.
Thank you very much. Hi, I think we're all here with I'm assuming for a common reason that we know and love The Wire. If you've never seen The Wire, things will be given away today, I'm fairly certain. So you might not want to spoil the experience. I'm not going to go into great length introducing these guys because in the course of the conversation, more of their histories will come out, and there will be audience questions later if you want to know where they went to high school and things like that. As a really brief introduction, The Wire is amazing series. I'll do my complimenting now. It's very fitting that it's at a festival of the book because any definition of literature that wouldn't include The Wire as being a piece of literature, I think, is a small and petty version of excuse for not using the word literature. The scope of it, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. It's got tremendous scope and tremendous heart and craft, and it's unbelievably entertaining, and it's also one of the most important pieces of social criticism that's ever been produced in America. These men have a righteous anger, and they temper it with humor. They're both also, very nice men, wonderful lovers, and
not of each other.
But with all these other amazing things that The Wire is, sort of the coat hanger that it's hung on, that the story and all this great work they've done is a police procedural. And so I wanted to start with just a couple of basic questions about process. And I think, David, just starting with you, you're a reporter. This is your roots. From when you first started following the story that became The Wire, to the great opening scene, when the day you were shooting that, I don't know if it's the first thing you shot, but the day you were shooting the great opening scene, Who Killed Snot? What was that journey like from?
It was an accident, really. I wrote a narrative book of nonfiction, Homicide, that was made into a television show, and they came and filmed it on location in Baltimore. That's such an improbability right there. All I wanted to do was write a book that I would sell enough copies that they would let me write another book. Because I imagined myself being a newspaper reporter for my whole career and taking, every 2 or 3 years going out and having a leave of absence and writing a book that was narrative and maybe a little deeper in scope than the coverage could be. But I saw them as interconnected, and so the TV show is this weird stepchild that showed up in Baltimore. And I liked the checks. It was nice when they sent me a check, but I didn't take it seriously. And even when they asked if I wanted to try to write an episode, I did it with David Mills, and we had a good time doing it. It was an old college friend of mine. But I didn't take it seriously, and I didn't take the form of television seriously for a long time. And even when I got into it sort of on my own 2 feet to do The Corner as a miniseries, I was just trying to sell more books. Like I thought if there was a miniseries, that more people would find the book. So there was never a moment where I said, yes, I'm going to transition from being a newspaperman to being a TV guy or dramatist or anything. It happened so gradually, and so it was like a slow seduction. And now it's just like this big ugly crack pipe. And I can't get it out of my mouth long enough to go back and write another book. But I don't mean to suggest that I didn't enjoy it along the way or it hasn't been gratifying, but it really was. And a lot of it is stealing from the original. That's the Snot Boogie story is real. I mean, it's right in Homicide. It was a story that Terry McLaurin gave me about a murder he handled. And when the guy said, "This is America," Terry loved it. Terry was cracking up. He said, "That was great," and it was. And so it was just something you put in your back pocket until you have a TV show 10 years later. So. So you go on to HBO, they've known you through Homicide, and how do you pitch it? Well, they knew me from The Corner. I'd done a decent job of turning in that miniseries. I mean, they knew I'd worked on Homicide, but actually when they hired me to do The Corner, they didn't trust me. Because while I had been taught a lot by Fontana and Levinson about how to do television while working on that show, I never had a title beyond producer, which is, it sounds big, but it's really, I was in charge of certain things about certain episodes, but I was never a showrunner or somebody who was in charge of the overall. And I certainly never had budgetary responsibility. So they were nervous, and they paired me with other people who had put film in the can and made marriages that actually turned out to be great for me. But so it was really off The Corner had turned out well, and the head of series, Carolyn Strauss, came to me and said, "Well, what else do you have?" Because at that point, I really was ready to go back and work on a third book. And she said, "Well, what else do you got?" And it was such an open-ended question. I was like, "I don't know. Let me think about that." But there were thematic things about the war on drugs and about urban policy that could not convey in The Corner. The Corner was a story. It was addiction told through the microcosm of a family, really, of a broken family. And so it was really a very intimate story, and it was not one where you could load on a bunch of politics and thematic stuff and argument and political argument, and it would have made it too didactic. So there were things we couldn't say that we had said in the book that seemed like a good starting point to try to build a city.
George, now, a very accomplished novelist with many novels, and Washington, D.C. is your beat, your stomping ground. How did you get mixed up with these Baltimoreans? or Baltimoreans?
Baltimoreans. Only we can say that. You can't say that.
Well, it's only 40 miles away, but it is, it's a different culture completely. The language is different, the dress, the music is different, and everything. I had to learn a lot, but David's girlfriend at the time, and now his wife, Laura Lippman, very accomplished Baltimore novelist, gave him one of my books. I think it was A Sweet Forever. And she said something like, "This guy's doing in Washington what you're doing in Baltimore," and, in a way, the social aspect of crime. And so I'd met David only once, and then a mutual friend of ours passed away, and we were at the cemetery, and David said, "Give me a lift back to the Shiva." So I'm driving him back, and he said, "I just sold a pilot to HBO. Would you like to write an episode?" And he did that thing, about the novel for television and all that. He was appealing to me as a novelist, and it turned out it was that. But I thought it was sort of a sales job and everything. But I knew that, I had seen The Corner. Of course, I'd seen Homicide, but more to the point, I'd seen The Corner, and I knew that this was going to be. I thought it was going to be more than what he was telling me it was going to be. And I was interested enough to try it out with one episode that year. And then I got more and more involved as the series went on, and I eventually became a producer. At some point I was writing 2 episodes a season, story editor, all that. But that was, that's how I got in it. And I had never written for television before. I'd done some movies that didn't get made, and I went to school on the show.
It's great. George, can you kind of, again, talking process, just what happens when there's, you go in from the blank page to a finished script? When you go in, how did the show work? A team of writers talking the story. You're going to write this episode. What was that day, that week, that day, that period of time like? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we there was a process. I mean, before any given season, we would sort of go, we'd either meet somewhere remote and go up to a hotel somewhere in upstate New York or something like that. And you know, our executive producer would book us into a place that didn't have a bar in it, you know?
The other executive producer.
The other executive producer. Who was really the general of the show. She made sure that we didn't, you know, stray too far off the lines and stuff. So we'd go up there and we'd talk about what the season was going to be about and sort of the arcs. And really it was just sitting around kind of talking about things in general terms. And then the hard work was going into the writer's room at the office in Baltimore and actually beating out the scripts. And that means scene by scene, you compose a diagram of each script. And ideally, and if you're interested, the way it works is there's index cards for the different kinds of the different groups that are in the show. So you have the police, you have the drug people, you have the politicians. Omar got his own card, color card, and then you start putting these up on a cork board. And the reason for the colors is that you can see that you're getting a pretty good mix of everything, and you're not going too heavily on the police or the mayor's office, stuff like that. And ideally, when you come out of there after 3 days, let's say, you've got a beat sheet, which is the scenes in order, day 1, night 1, day 2, night 2, like that. And it's a 35, let's say, beats, ideally. But a lot of times you walk out of there with 45 beats or something, and those are scenes, and you're trying to cram them into a 58-minute episode. So that's how we did it. And we would try to get 4 of those done, 4 of those scripts, you know, diagrams done before we started shooting the season, so the writers could go off and write the first 4 scripts. David always wrote the first show, and the pilot, of course. And then once you start shooting, you're working on the fly in the same way, but it gets a little more pressurized.
Right.
Yeah, I was curious, just in doing that, how often did real events come in when you thought you had an arc of a season? Did things happen, or even the arc of the whole series? Did things happen in the world along the way that, you know, altered your view of it? Is a show that
I mean, we kept track of stuff. Like, we knew we were doing education in season 4, so if there was stuff happening in the news involving the school system in Baltimore, we would sort of clip it, and it went into the file. And, you know, I mean, like, for example, the budget shortfall that we used in the school system, that actually happened in Baltimore. The outcome was actually different in that immediately after the shortfall was discovered and all the missing money in the school budget came to light, there was then a huge increase in the real estate tax in Baltimore that covered the overage. So they didn't have a crisis. They actually were able, because that was right before real estate collapsed, and so the run-up in real estate values led to a short-term run-up in revenue for the city, and they were able to cover it. But so sometimes we varied from reality, sometimes we used reality. I can't recall us ever being thrown a monkey wrench, except for before we shot the pilot. You know, when the show had been approved and we were getting ready to shoot, and then 911 happened, and I took a moment to think about what was in the pilot and what we were saying, and from what I knew as a police reporter, it became really clear that the war on drugs was no longer going to be a federal priority in any sense, and it hasn't been ever since 911. You know, the FBI, which only has about 10, 11,000 agents, maybe 12 now, they're chiefly responsible for domestic counterterrorism, and white collar crime used to be their priority, and public corruption. They're doing less of that. You know, most of that agency has been taken over by counterterrorism. So it was obvious that the drug war was not going to matter to them. So we wrote that in, and it made it sort of nice, because then we could get the feds, for the most part, the feds could be disinterested in what was happening in our inner city, which they were. It was entirely accurate. But we had to do a little bit of guesswork on that before filming the first season.
Did you have the basic of the 5-season arc? Was that part of your original plan, your original pitch?
No, I went to HBO and said we're gonna take apart the drug war, And I mean, actually, if any of you ever see the Wire book that is out there, they actually reprinted the letter that I wrote, the sort of begging letter that they should make the show. And it says, basically, it was trying to undercut the cop show as a convention, the notion that if you catch the right guy, the world is set right. I guess it's sort of a convention of traditional crime writing, of traditional detective fiction. That if you can just get back, if you can find the murderer and get back to status quo, the world will just be a little bit. And in truth, I think crime writing grew up when it abandoned that, or at least when it moved beyond that, I should say. And in a sense, this was television trying to move beyond that in its own medium, which was to say, halfway through the season, you should no longer be worrying about whether they're going to catch the bad guy, but what is a bad guy is more of the issue. And the show was not about good or evil. It was about the systemic. And so I made that argument, but I only kept it to the drug war because if I'd have said to them on going into that first meeting, we're going to build a city and we're going to do it slice, they would have laughed me out of it. That's the conversation we had in season 2 before we went to the port. We said we're going to go to a completely different, and then if you keep giving us seasons, we're going to slice off a different piece of the city. So it was, first get him in for a penny, then there's a
But
bit
was
of...
it in your mind, or was it sort of, during the middle of the first season, at some point you went, wait a second?
No, it was in our mind. I wanted to go to the port very much. Ed didn't like the port as an idea, early on, but he came around to it in a big way. But Ed wanted to do education. It became apparent once we started building the city that we were going to have to do the political element sooner rather than later. So we didn't really need it as much for the port, but we needed to have the council and the mayor and the whole political dynamic. We needed to have an election happen. Of course, that's the predicate for any political story. So that became obvious. I wanted to end on the media because the whole thing is in a way a critique of what we pay attention to and why we can't even recognize our own problems, much less solve any of them. And then we threw it. There was times where we threw it open to the writers and talked about, can we come up with another theme? And I don't think we ever satisfied ourselves with any that didn't feel redundant in their own way. And of course, the last couple seasons we were struggling to finish the arcs that we intended.
Yeah, because there were a lot of arcs.
Yeah, so even if we had thought of a 6th, I'm not sure I would have had the chutzpah to go back and just give us one more. Thanks for the last 2, but give us one more.
Yeah. What? I know it didn't happen. You didn't want it. What would have been like the cup of coffee between the two of you guys if you decided we want to do the healthcare system? Is that how you would be sort of like, I've been kind of bugged about this? How did those things bounce off when you do it?
I don't know. The one thing that we talked about that we didn't do was immigration, and that would be something that that we're all interested in that we didn't get around to. But I feel like I'm happy that we had 5 seasons and we got out because nobody ever said the 8th season of Hawaii 5-0 was better than the second one. You know what I mean? It just doesn't happen. Eventually you're gonna repeat yourself and then you start hating yourself and then the show reflects that.
Yeah. And while the themes might not repeat, while there might be new things to say about the institutional dynamic of healthcare or immigration or anything, the problem is you're starting to strain the credibility and level of interest in these. How many times can McNulty fuck the dog and climb the hill? At a certain point it becomes he can only arc back and forth a few times before he has to either win or lose, and so at some point. There are lots of things to say about lots of things, but there's a point at which you need a new universe just as writers, because the characters have done everything you could ask of them.
Great. Hey, taking from that to just switch gears a little into writing, because I know there's just so many writers here. Studying as a journalist, studying as a novelist, what was the learning curve to writing script form instead? I can't write prose, I'm just terrible. How did it affect you? How do you learn it? Was it easier or harder?
No, honestly, a lot of writers don't admit this, but I was more influenced by movies in becoming a writer than I was by novels and westerns. war movies, things like that. All the movies, the John Sturges and Robert Aldrich and Sam Peckinpah, Sergio Leone, all these people turned me on more than Faulkner did, certainly when I was a kid. And I didn't start reading books till I was in college. So I sort of had a story sense a sense of writing for cinema, writing for TV and also writing for production. After you're working on this for a while, you don't do things like a 30-second scene at 4 in the morning because the crew's going to be out there at 4 or 5 in the morning, and it takes 2 hours to film a 30-second scene. So all these things you sort of learn. But to directly answer your question, the hardest thing for me to get used to was working with a bunch of people. As a novelist, I sit in a room by myself, and then all of a sudden you got to get along with people. And there's a lot of egos in that room, and mine included. But it's fun. I like that part of it too. I mean, I actually look forward to coming to work when I was doing the show because of all the different personalities. And I think that I became a better writer after working on The Wire. I do.
It's funny. I'm going to use that as a cheap segue to be able to read like a lovely passage from here and then ask about, this is from George's book, The Night Gardener. And I love this because it's something that then it shows up in The Wire in a different form, and you use it so differently. And just how it works in a novel one way, and then again brilliantly in The Wire. We're talking about a snitch, and he's a very, very, very minor character in this book, and but in the painting with quick strokes, George writes, Fishhead was looking to get out of his sister's basement. It had been their mother's house, but the sister had managed to claim it and the inheritance with the help of a lawyer. Because she did have a conscience, she allowed him a room downstairs, rent-free, but no kitchen privileges, and a lock on the door leading up to the first floor. It was not much more than a mattress, a hot plate for cooking, a cooler, and a toilet with a stand-up shower had roaches crawling on the floor. He didn't blame her for treating him like a dog he didn't let upstairs. All the shit he'd done to disappoint his family, he could understand it. But no man, not even a low-ass doper like him, should have to live like that. I think you guys will recognize that that's something that gets played with Bubbles brilliantly over a long arc, and it's ultimately the most redemptive moment, I think, in the whole series. I mean, arguably is
personally redemptive, yeah.
He gets to go upstairs, which it is like the happy.
Not all of us do.
I know.
That's a good. It's a good example of how the TV show did things better than a novel can do sometimes. Because it became this. That walk up the stairs was his redemption, his small moment of redemption that we gave him in the show. And then the one that I wrote in the book was just the thing I was tossing off for, just to do a quick character sketch and let you know a little bit about the guy, but it didn't have any weight. It definitely had weight in the show. And by the way, I didn't think of that.
What?
In the show, I didn't have anything to do with that.
I stole it from Gary McCall. Gary McCall lived in his parents' basement, and his mother allowed him kitchen privileges because he would never steal from the house. It was one thing that he could never bring himself to do. Whereas I knew other guys who were living in the basement when I was doing the corner, and they couldn't come up the stairs. So it was something that Ed and I had in our back pocket from that. I think it was a truism that, one of the fun things that when I started reading George is that, at first a lot of people had told me to read George Pelecanos, not the least of which was Carrie Antholis, the HBO executive, who we had both written for prior. And he said, you got to read this guy. And I came from Washington. I grew up very near George. But having moved to Baltimore, then I had a Baltimorean's contempt for, I don't know what you do in Montana, but everyone hates someone from somewhere else. If you're from Milwaukee, or if you live in Milwaukee, you hate people from Chicago. If you're from Oregon, you hate people from California. In Baltimore, we really resent people from Washington. And have for real big chip on our shoulders. So the notion that anybody was going to be writing crime in Washington and have anything to say to me, the police reporter, I really was resistant. And then I read it and I realized he's clearly doing research. This is not unresearched, sort of flabby crime writing like what do bad guys do and what would it drive. This is a guy who is who is learning his city. And you never stop learning what you're writing about. I mean, that's almost the pleasure in a way.
Yep.
So it's entirely conceivable to me, in fact, it's inevitable, that his description of guys who are trying to get their shit together after a long period of addiction would be in approximately the same place as, how would that be different 30 miles apart? Drugs are the same, the human dynamic's the same.
Wow, that's free associating wildly off that. With the drugs are the same in the situation. When you do the big arcs in the 2 seasons of the Social Experiment arcs, we'll have the drug-free zone, and we'll take the kids out of the really tough killing the kids out of classroom. I'm a New Yorker, and those things read perfectly true to me that this is something's going on. Was that something that had been happened, or was that something you guys?
No, we made that up. There's never been a police commander who legalized drugs in any practical way.
Was it, was that one of those conversations that you made up out of fun, like, well, if we ran the world, we'd try this?
Well, I mean, The Corner as a book is a very careful critique of why the drug war can't work, and why drug prohibition is actually a destructive element in our cities, and why, it's destroying law enforcement. Never mind that it's not stopping drug use or inhibiting drug use. It's actually destroying law enforcement in a counterintuitive way that I could explain here if we wanted to blow 20 minutes, but we don't. But it's in there, it's in the book. And one of the things that Ed Burns came up with, Ed's a big part of the why. He doesn't do these things. Ed doesn't do the panels. He really doesn't like it. But he's a very influential guy in the writer's room, and very bright man, former detective, former school teacher. And one of the things that he was passionate about when we were writing and reporting The Corner was the paper bag, the notion that police work salvaged itself. Once they passed laws that said you couldn't drink on the street in a place like Baltimore, those are good laws for Missoula, probably. They're bad laws for West Baltimore because, a lot of people in West Baltimore can't pay bar prices, and you don't want to sit in a bar if you can't pay the prices. So you get to carry out malt liquor, and then you only want to buy one, because if you buy a 6-pack, guys are going to bum the other 5 from you. So you buy one, and you put it in the paper bag, and you're showing enough respect to the cop on the beat by drinking out of a paper bag that he doesn't have to stop you and lock you up for violating the liquor law. He can go on and do actual police work. And the parallel is or the lack of parallel with drugs is that there was never a paper bag, and so the cops couldn't drive by, and so they made this into first-rate crime when it was actually third-rate crime, and first-rate crime never got addressed, and so the cities became unlivable. They made tons of drug arrests. There was no paper bag, but but law enforcement declined in all major cities in terms of solve rate, arrest rate, everything. So that was Ed. That was Ed. The paper, Amsterdam is the paper bag applied. I mean, it's law enforcement coming up with a paper bag for narcotics. And so that actually was, it was me taking Ed's argument to a practical, or as practical as we could make it, implementation. And it has been tried in European cities, though not Amsterdam. We used Amsterdam because Amsterdam, while it's a very permissive city and you can buy good hash there, and it's just a wonderful place, but it was actually, I think, Zurich that had a needle park where you could go and not be arrested. But Zurich doesn't. The kids can't make fun of Zurich.
Yeah.
Amsterdam was just tremendous. I don't remember who came up with that, but that was good for you.
I'm gonna take credit.
Amsterdam was that was magical. At that point, it had to be. Sometimes the inaccuracy is what plays.
So then, George, you're safe living in Washington, but David, once the series was out and going on, can you walk down the street in Baltimore to teachers, thank you?
We had no problem with anybody who was rank and file anything, with rank and file cops, teachers, journalists, political functionaries, but not if they were up to middle management, we were okay. If they were in charge of anything, if they were seeking a promotion, if they were running for office, if they were responsible for the imagery that said things are getting better, not worse, then they were not happy with us. But I still live in Baltimore. It's not a big deal.
you can still get a table at the restaurant.
Yeah. All good. All good.
With the actors in this, it's an amazing cast. So this is sort of going back to what affects the writing. Did you find, with the cast in general, which is great, but particularly with the 4 kids who are, unbelievable and such a challenge to kind of find that, did it change what you thought you were going to be able to write about when you saw what they could do? Or did they just live up to your very, high expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I think they exceeded. We were very happy with they made it all human, I mean, that's why, I don't know what David thinks, but I think season 4 is our best season. Number one, because it's about kids, and it's like a punch in the heart what happens to these kids, but also what the actors brought to it elevated the words, in my opinion. And so we were very, very fortunate, I think, to have them.
So it became very conscious that you went, wow, we've seen a few episodes. These kids are amazing. We can write up. They can do anything we can write.
Well, we knew their limits. Every actor has limits, and they're young actors. But they exceeded we had no fears after the first dailies came in. They were going to be able to cover the material and cover it credibly. There are things that you could ask, some actors to do that you can't ask other, comedy for some actors is its own form of timing, and there's certain things you can't ask, down to the real pragmatic stuff. There are certain actors that you can't ask to drive a vehicle while they're saying dialogue. I mean, you just learn which people there's a lot of biofeedback of what works. Like on Homicide, there was a rule in the writer's room: we don't want to ever see Richard Belzer run. So you learn these things, but you bring an actor on and you realize what their strengths are and you try to play to the strengths. We were locked into certain storylines. Certain things had to happen, so we couldn't write our way around. This was not a show where you could kill off an actor because they were pissing you off or they weren't. You had to get to the ends that you intended, but you could write a little. Listen, like for Michael K. Williams, Omar was going to be Omar. There needed to be an Omar in the dynamic, but do you write the ornate dialogue that we sometimes enjoyed writing for him? Do you give him as much meat on the bone? You got to give him the bone because you need the story, but you're going to put more flesh on there because this guy really is so you end up enjoying the sentences more, and maybe there's an extra couple of moments, and Richard Price puts in a little British witticism in every indeed, or do tell, and but that was so you'll start to have a good time with an actor's strengths, and you'll try to duck an actor's weaknesses.
Yeah, there's guys like Wendell Pierce, who played Bunk. The writers really loved to write for him. I know I did,
yeah.
And he always made it better. And he was a pro. He knew his lines coming onto the set. All those things really make you want to do things for the actor too. The guy who played Slim Charles was that was going to be one or two scenes or something like that, and
turned out to be great.
And Glover, and so he became more of a regular guy on the show.
Cool. Hey, and going off that, there's the sense of humor, because we're talking about how serious. This is a very serious show that rips the lid off corruption in America. It's also very funny. How do you
It's the funniest show about the end of the American Empire that there is. I'll defend that.
Yeah.
There is no funnier show about the decline of our society.
How consciously were you balancing that in? Did you kind of, did that get
the humor is
far?
what makes it bearable. The humor, and to me, as a writer, I don't know about George, but we plan the dramatic moments carefully. You're building, and one of the reasons George would, always take the penultimate episode of the season. That's usually when sort of the critical moment of violence. You were always building to somebody, usually whoever your reformer / protagonist / somebody who was about to confront a truth. They were about to get screwed, in a big way, and from George's books, from reading George, I realized that, what he is, and it's funny because he doesn't work with an outline, he just finds it naturally, but there's this progression to often, without you sensing any of the choreography of plot, he gets to the moment of cathartic violence in a way that is the most, it's where the book builds and pays out. And that was the place. He was the right writer. Having done this in his books repeatedly, he was the right writer to build that. So ultimately, I've lost my way. I went aside to compliment George. And what was the original question?
The human, yeah.
Right.
So how much did it plan,
Right, I know where I was going.
Got it.
Thank you. I'll get back there. But what I was going to say is, we planned the drama with a lot of, this and that, and this guy has to, and, that was the subject of most of the debate in the writer's room. Comedy comes afterwards, and it's really about, it's intimate. It's between the writer and the actor, and whether the actor has the timing. Comedy is ineffable. How it happens, you'd write the funniest line, and sometimes even a good actor would butcher it, because it was comic, and it had, it's a matter of, sometimes it's a matter of the way the director blocks it. It's not funny if, sometimes the camera misses the line and it happens off camera. My favorite funny line in The Wire is when the camera moves past Squeak, and she says, or he says, or it moves past Bernard and says, "I can't wait to go to jail." It was this throwaway line, and it made me cry every time I saw it. I was laughing so hard, and that was like the blocking just happened to be a miracle. The camera was off him, and we had a little hole to have him throw the line away about how bad his girlfriend is. He can't wait to go to jail, and then you can hear her going on. What did you just say? So they're locked up at the moment, but. That stuff is like, how do you get there? It's like when it happens, and when it doesn't, if you try to plan comedy too much, sometimes it doesn't work, but you can never plan drama too much,
How would working off that, did you guys go into the editing room, did you use the edit as a final read for episodes? Would you find yourself, we thought we had this plan, but if we shift these two scenes?
Oh yeah,
that kind of
the editing is a creative act. And being reductive sometimes makes it a lot better. You can edit out your mistakes, and you can also create certain things by switching. There's a lot you can do with editing, but you can't rescue a weak script. And I learned this on other shows, and I learned it early on. Editing is, it's what you do with the icing on the cake. You can make it, but it's not if the cake's screwed up underneath. All the icing in the world can't help. And a lot of people say, we'll fix it in post. That's the great mantra of filmmaking. I think there's a problem with this script. We'll fix it in post. You never fix it in post. If the problem's that big that you recognize it on the set, or you recognize it before you get to set, then you need to not film it.
Yep.
Well, kind of on that note, and the fact that you guys are wonderful bakers, which was good news. Let's turn
Very
over
bad
to
metaphor.
I don't think.
Never go to a baking metaphor. Not in Montana, anyway.
Let's open up to the audience to see what you want to say to these cake bakers, pastry chefs of drama. So we're going to see some hands, and we'll get some questions. Way in the back.
You were just talking about being funny makes one funny moment makes you want to cry. I don't know.
I made crying like laughing.
I understand. I wonder if you would talk about the scene where the two detectives investigate the crime scene and just use the word "fuck."
Everyone loves that. It's really. I will credit Terry McLarney, who is now the commander of the Baltimore Homicide Unit. He's now a major, but he was a sergeant when I wrote the book in Homicide, and he was a very, very bright guy who played anti-intellectual. He had a law degree. He was a very smart man, but he liked to play dumb cop. It was his thing. He used it to great effect. And one time he said to me, he said, "We're getting to the point. The profanity is so thick that we're getting to the point where two cops can be able to just use the word fuck and understand each other perfectly." And that's all the words we're ever going to need. And then he laughed and drank his beer, but I remembered that. And so Ed wrote that scene. Ed wrote that scene and actually parsed the crime scene so that it worked, and how the bullet would never be found by two detectives, and how they would find it, and where the refrigerator and the door and the milk. I mean, he did it. And then we filmed it, and then when we got to post, this is like where the icing does help you a little bit. We added, in every hole we added looping of the two detectives saying fuck or motherfuck even more than they did, and sort of built the scene shot by shot. But it was funny because we got a lot of criticism when the show first aired is, oh, this is just NYPD Blue with bad language and a little more nudity. Very simplistic, we'd sent 4 or 5 tapes, but most critics, particularly like in New York or LA, where time moves faster, that they only put in the 1 tape. So they thought, this is pretty what are they doing? And one of the things they criticized us for was the level of profanity. Like, is this really necessary? Whereas the cops and street guys were just talking the way they talked to me. But we knew that was coming. It was like, if they think we're going to scale back, wait till they get to episode 4. And very tellingly, after we did episode 4, we never heard another bit of criticism about it. It's not like the criticism ramped up. It was like, oh, well, now it's art. It's like, before it was just dirty language. Now I see what they're doing.
George, were you I know you were a specialist at killing people off.
Oh, yeah.
He shared a couple of thoughts about profanity and killing people off.
Oh, I agree with David. I mean, you just you write your characters the way they would speak, and that's what we did there. I mean, the reason I got that coveted next to last episode every time was because the first year I had the task of killing off Wallace, the kid, in that episode in season 1 when his friends kill him, and it was, again, the actors really brought it, and they made it a very emotional scene. And I wasn't on the set that day, but I think a lot of people were upset at the, during the shoot, because it was just, it's almost like over the line. Never seen anything like that before. And so then David and I had this unofficial sort of handshake that I would always get that episode, and it turned out that it was, Frank Sabatka went to his doom, Stringer Bell, all these people, Snoop at the end, and I wrote all those scenes, and good scenes, man. I mean, when you're a writer, you want that kind of meat, you know what I mean? And when we were in the writers' room, I know the other guys were like, what, thanks for the scene of the mayor and all the guys talking in the room. Why does Pelicanis always get this stuff, But the funny thing about that is, like, somebody like Richard Price would take what we give him and turn it into this comedic sort of masterpiece stuff. Like the bass, the pitcher and all that. What was that?
The catcher. What guy would you sleep with if you could then sleep with any girl you want? Gus Triendos.
Gus Triendos.
The Oriole catcher, the old Oriole catcher.
And that was all Price, And he wrote the paper bag speech too. That scene, which I think is a brilliant scene, where Bunny Colvin actually talks about it to his men. And then Lahane killed Omar. So that was. We all had our shot at it.
Good company. With another question, baseball cap.
Hi, The Wire started up just after I moved to Baltimore, and I felt like I learned about my city through it, so thanks for that. I was thinking about the character.
Why are you here now?
That's why.
What have we done?
But the character Omar, I really like that character, but sometimes it seemed to me like he was that show's biggest concession to maybe a little bit more cop show or Hollywood style story. You've got this bad guy with a heart of gold. He does some in the opening scene where you see him and he shoots the guy in the leg cold-heartedly in that rip-off scene.
Well, he murdered people, but
he murdered people.
But they were all in the game, so you forgave him.
And let the viewer kind of root for him. I was just wondering how much that character was based on anyone real or on a composite of real people.
He was based on a composite of real guys. I think it's sort of incredible to people who are not familiar with how entrenched the drug trade is in major cities. When you tell them that there are guys who rob drug dealers who have had careers of 10, 15, 20, 25 years. It seems like it would be a very short-lived adventure or misadventure, but the truth is the money is so great in the drug trade that a lot of dealers, rather than go to war with somebody who is just as violent and capable of finding you as you are of finding him, the better thing to do is just write it off to spillage and say, he got me, and keep going. because there's just so much profit. And that's what a lot of guys do. And that's why, as long as you don't hurt a guy to the very edge of his pride, you can go a long time. And the guys who we based it on were, a guy named Donnie Andrews, who actually, he was the big guy who he teamed up with Omar in the last season in the jail, and then later on he's killed in the shootout. That's a real guy. That's a guy who robbed drug dealers, Larry Donnell Andrews, from the 70s into the late 80s. He had an incredible run before he went to prison, and then he came out, and we used him in the show. But Anthony Holly, Ferdinand Harvin, Cadillac and Lowe, these are all names that are very well known in Baltimore, in West Baltimore, for having been guys who just robbed drug dealers. You don't have to worry about the cops. And in fact, the drug dealers fear you more than they fear the cops. Your intelligence is probably better than the police. So it was based on very real people. We used a lot of the adventures of these guys for Omar, including the going out the window. Donnie jumped out of the 6th floor of the Murphy homes and landed on the grass hill, sprained an ankle. If I make that jump, I die. If you make that jump, you die. Donnie didn't want to die. That he was trapped, and he had to make the jump, and he did. And it's like this is common knowledge in West Baltimore. But yes, we did enjoy Omar as being a little bit mythic, because we were writing a tragedy here, and every myth needs at least a genuflection towards the heroic. But at the same time, we were careful at very critical points to undercut that. And I think one of the more fundamental places where we did was George wrote a scene in the 3rd season where Bunk just disassembles Omar on this park bench when they're talking. That was an essential part of the prism with which we wanted viewers to look at Omar, because while he seems heroic at points, you have to really take into context what he's doing, how parasitic his place in the culture is.
Yeah, that's one of the greatest scenes, I think, in the series. Did you come out of the room knowing the scene, or how much was discovered in the writing?
That was almost a collaboration with me and Wendell. We talked about it, and he told me the story about how the guys, when he was growing up, he was pretty good in school, but he lived in a rough neighborhood, and he said some of the real gangsters, would say to him, they'd call him schoolboy, they'd protect him, they'd say, go home, go back to your books, all that stuff, and that kind of gave me the spark for it. And I respected him enough to as an actor to know that, to want to do that with him. But the other thing about Omar is that when he, I know maybe somebody hasn't seen the show yet, but I can't, it's been years now, so we have to talk about it. The way he goes is on purpose, is completely demythologizes him and takes the romance out of Omar, because I had been seeing kids in my neighborhood talking about the show, and one of the things is when you try to do something subtle, it's going to be lost on some people, or they're going to get the wrong message. And I'd seen some kids looking at guys like Omar and putting him up on the pedestal, like he was the coolest guy on the show. And when Randy talks to the principal or whoever he talks to, instead of looking at it as a sort of a tragic thing that happens to him, the kids were saying, Randy's a bitch, or he's a little snitch and all this stuff. And you're not getting it right. So, when Omar dies in the most unromantic way, and you cut to the newsroom, and they look at it, and he's just like just another dead yo, and they throw the thing in the basket,
And we, in the end, we knew where that story had to end, for a variety of reasons that remain true to the theme of the show. But I did enjoy in the first couple of seasons. There was a lot of instant love for Omar when he shot down the guy in the knee the first time you saw him do a robbery, and then the second robbery where he whistles his way into the guys. And all of a sudden, in Baltimore anyway, you started hearing guys go, "Yeah, Omar. It's all about Omar." And then I think it was the next episode, he kisses his boyfriend, and it screwed particularly, and I love that. I have to say, I loved undercutting that, because there's a lot of homophobia in places like West Baltimore that is overtly expressed, and I think one of the great triumphs that Michael K. is that a lot of people reflected on that homophobia through Omar. And that by the end of the run, it was like you were hearing guys saying, I don't care if he sucks a dick. Omar's the shit. You would hear this. You would hear them say that, and it would be like, well, that's a victory, That we've taken people, it's like, I'm willing to let anybody in the club if they're that tough. And that was, I enjoyed that. But at the same time, at the end, we owed something to the message about what was at stake to have Omar end as he did.
Great. Michael.
Could you talk a little bit about what working for HBO gives you as opposed to working for the networks? I obviously you get freedom in terms of language, certain kinds of restrictions that aren't there. Is there anything else that working that way is?
You're going to finish the season. They might cancel you after the season, but they're not going to cancel you after 4. That's a big deal. It's like I know that I have to make only the most reasonable concessions to maintaining an audience. The other thing is, on the whole, on the grand scale, the economy of HBO is so different from network TV. If you want to know why network TV has failed to tell a meaningful story for any sustained period, or to tell any dissenting story about American life, because The Wire is, in its own way, dissent. It's arguing that this is the America that we've built. This is the America we've paid for. We've paid for nothing better. We don't deserve anything better. It's basically a critique of what we've become and how we can't even recognize our own problems, much less solve them. In order to do that, you'd have to get rid of advertisers, because advertisers require that people every 12 minutes you pause in your drama, and people be introduced to the newest iPods and the Lincoln Continentals and the Stonewashed jeans and feminine hygiene products, and then come back, and then we're going to do that again in 12 minutes. So if that's the economic model, then the ads are the prime. The primacy is with the ads. The drama is just the shit you put around it in order to get people to the ads. That is how television has been since its inception. It's been subsidized. Once you buy the set, it's been free, and we get you to the advertisers, and the advertisers pay us. Well, at that point, nobody's going to tell you a story. How are we going to get you to buy iPods and Lincoln Continentals if we've just told you that all the underpinnings of your society are just that much more fraudulent than you thought they were? And as if other Americans are being betrayed on a socioeconomic and political level. Even as you contemplate the new cut of blue jeans at the Gap. If that's the construct, then The Wire doesn't get past a pitch meeting. It never happens. It can't happen. Nor does The Sopranos, nor does Deadwood, nor do a lot of things. So TV has always been an inferior medium until cable. HBO, hey, if everybody doesn't watch The Wire, if there are people who disagree with it, if there are people who don't want to be brought down, if there are people who don't want a sad story or an angry story or political dissent, they don't have to, they'll still pay HBO $17.95 for the comedy specials, or for Curb Your Enthusiasm, or all this stuff's fine, or for hookers at the point. I don't know what whatever they buy from HBO, as long as they pay their $17.95, HBO really doesn't care on an economic level if they watch everything. So if The Wire only gets, this much of a share, okay, but it's good and the critics like it, and it's bringing some people into the tent. That's an economic model in which you can actually do good work. And so that's, I've never had to worry, in Homicide, it was like we looked at the ratings on Mondays, the overnights, as if it was like life or death. I stopped looking at the ratings. I didn't give a shit after a while. It was just like, hey, we get to tell a story, let's go. And that's so different from the culture of television production prior to cable that, it's incredible.
Hi, woman with glasses and hand raised.
Can you tell us a little bit about the character of Snoop? I've kind of never seen such a bad woman
You should talk about the character. I just remember the day I met her. Richard and I were down, and Ed were down in this church in the city doing a meeting on the location, and security, the guy head of security for our show, Scott Perry, came into the meeting. He said, "I want you to meet somebody." And we walked out to the street and we talked to her. And I honestly, at first, I didn't know it was a girl, and because she talks in a very gravelly voice and she's slight and she doesn't have traditional chest. I don't know how to say it.
Curves.
Curves, yeah.
Yeah, George Pelicanos doesn't know how to say it. Yeah. That was so innocent.
So anyway, she had, as some of you know, she had just come out of prison on a murder conviction, I believe. Yeah. And again, it was one of those, we said, collectively, we said, we gotta use her, She's so unusual, we have to use her, and she's so real. But we didn't, I don't think that we intended her to be, again, what she became in the show, right?
No, I mean, we decided to put her in one of the drug gangs because we thought it would be a remarkable thing to have. In some ways, it's the updated, harsh, dramatic version of Anybody's or something from West Side Story. It's the girl who wants in the gang. But then, I mean, like we used her in a little scene. She was on the back of a motorcycle when they did a murder, and then we gave her a little bit of dialogue at the end about how Stringer got killed, and she finally, and she was a little off book but she got the intent of the scene. But to her great credit, she looked at this opportunity so seriously. She got an acting coach. She started showing up for set, knowing her lines, trying harder and harder to stay on book. And to the extent that she began as sort of we were playing her for sort of street realism, and in the end we were treating her like an actor, like somebody in the cast, and she really took that opportunity. It was really
Great. One of my favorite moments in one of the extras, they're asking her what her favorite scene was, and she says, "When I was riding," I can't do the voice, but I was riding on the back of the motorcycle doing the drive-by. It's the first time I ever done a drive-by on a motorcycle.
I don't have any comment.
Wow. Heike, we have another question. Anik.
Well, I know that you're going from Baltimore to New Orleans, and I'm wondering, without giving this new series away, if it's a New Orleans version of the same thing, or if it's a completely different take on the world.
This is about regular people. One of the holy grails in television writing, which is very rarely cited, much less acquired, is writing a drama, an hour drama, about ordinary folk, people who are not lawyers or doctors or gangsters or cops, people who are not, it's not life and death right before, is he guilty, is he innocent, is he going to live, is he going to die? These are all the tropes that sustain television in America and elsewhere. And one of the great grails is the idea of writing about a neighborhood or just people, I mean, even when they come to the very edge of it, it ends up being the more outrageous, the better. The first couple seasons of a show called Northern Exposure, you probably saw that show, right? It's almost like your neighbor or something. Anyway, to me, watching, I was just delighted to see a story about some small town with characters that seemed, delightful. I just wanted to watch the show. I wanted to be there. I wanted to, and that's like pulling something off against all odds in television. So New Orleans is a place as idiosyncratic and nuanced as that weird little town in Alaska that they created, except it actually exists, and it is deserving of us paying attention, particularly in light of the grand indifference shown to its future by the entire country, by the collective, by the American collective. I'm convinced, because I actually think there's a lot of good heart in this country still, that the government's performance when it came to Katrina is the thing that finally took the piss out of the last administration. It wasn't Iraq. It wasn't the economic collapse. It was. Nothing could be more apparent about how appalling, how lacking in gravitas and in heart our leaders were when you saw what happened, not just in the immediate aftermath, but in their inability to get to fulfill the promises that were made. And that went on for years. It's now the money's starting to flow, but so I couldn't have gotten that show made. I've been going to New Orleans since '88. I wanted to do something in New Orleans for a long time, but you couldn't go to New Orleans and explain what it meant to people who've never been to New Orleans. It's very hard. You have to show it. And so you try to explain it to people in LA, and they wouldn't get it, you know. They'd be like, Mardi Gras Indians? Are they like real like Indians? No. Yeah, it's hard to explain New Orleans to anybody unless you've been there, or unless you tell the story first. Then they get it. So the storm gave us an opportunity. But it's not The Wire comes to New Orleans. It's not a crime show. It's not lawyers. It's not, it's not intrigue, political intrigue. We did that show. You want to see that shit? Get The Wire DVDs. I promise you, it'll be the same every time you watch it. But this is a chance to write about the city and what the city means, and why we're an urban people. Even you guys in Missoula are urban. Maybe not as urban as we are, but 80% of Americans live in a metropolitan area. And so I'm interested in not so much small town values or real Americans. I'm interested, forgive me, Ms. Palin, but the people I live with in Baltimore are real, and they're Americans. And how people in American cities learn to coexist or not coexist, how they learn to build a society or not build a society, that's the framework on which we're going to thrive or not going forward. And that's the interesting part of me, and The Wire, I think that may have gotten lost. That we were saying, we had some affection for the city. We were saying, this matters. What's being lost here is something that matters very much. And I think there may have been people who watched that and just the lesson they got was, man, I'm glad I'm not in Baltimore.
And it seemed to me that part of that was a necessity of the story, where with your Barksdales, the drug business is a family business, and you had much more sense of the family. And then once they're killed off, then sort of like the next wave of dealers came in who really didn't care.
Well, yeah, we took the, that's Marlowe. You probably speak to that, but we took that to its logical conclusion, I think, of the sort of totalitarianism of the drug trade. But yeah, for those who are expecting The Wire to just gravitate to New Orleans, we're going to disappoint you.
The show's going to have a lot of music. David didn't even mention that. It's going to be heavy with music, and it's going to be a lot of fun, too.
Well, on that note, you can go rent The Wire and still enjoy it over and over. But now you get to know you're looking forward to something coming up soon from New Orleans.
Maybe.
From these two.
If April is soon, sorry.
Is it April?
April, yeah.
It's a long, cold winter here. But again, I'd just like if everyone could just thank these guys for their.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.